In the gritty underbelly of 1990s Chicago, where the roar of motorcycles drowned out the wail of sirens, one man's name was whispered with equal parts fear and respect: Mel Chancey. At just 23, Mel became the youngest Hells Angels president in the city's history, commanding an army of outlaws in a war that would leave the streets stained with blood.
Mel is a former president of the Hells Angel biker gang. He ran the Hells Angels in Chicago during their infamous war with the Outlaws.
He was the youngest president in the group's 72-year history, becoming president of the Angels at just 23 years of age.
By 25, he'd survived a bombing that rocked the nation. 100 pounds of C4 turning his clubhouse into a crater. It was the third largest terrorist attack on U.S. soil at the time. A wake-up call that echoed from the streets of Chicago to the halls of power in Washington.
He's been to hell and back on more than one occasion, served multiple prison sentences, led the charge during the notorious Hells Angel and Outlaw War, a 6-year bloodbath that has come to be known as one of the most deadly, violent gang wars in the history of organized crime.
For 3 years, from 1994 to 1997, Mel's life was a storm of violence that drew the attention of over 200 federal agents. The things he saw, the choices he made, they'd be enough to fill a dozen lifetimes with nightmares.
At one point, federal law enforcement agencies considered him to be one of the most wanted and dangerous gangsters in the entire country.
But this isn't just a tale of chaos and crime. It's a story of transformation so radical, so unexpected, it challenges everything we think we know about redemption.
Today, Mel Chancey leads daily devotionals followed by thousands worldwide. The man who once orchestrated mayhem now preaches peace.
How does someone go from the top of the outlaw world to a beacon of hope? What does it take to turn your back on everything you've known, everything you've been? Buckle up, brothers. We're about to take a ride through hell and back with Mel Chancey. It's a journey that will make you question the nature of good and evil, the power of choice, and the human capacity for change. This is one man's story, but it's also a mirror held up to our own lives, our own choices. Are you ready to look? Born to be wild. Chicago, 1969, a city of grit and steel. In the shadow of skyscrapers, a legend is born. Mel Chancey enters the world, fists clenched and ready to fight.
So I was born and raised in a suburb of Chicago, in Illinois, a town called Elsop, and
who could have guessed what lay ahead for this baby boy? Certainly not his parents, hardworking folks who raised him with values of respect and discipline.
My dad was a hard worker all his life. My mom ran the Little League, ran the bank, and my mom and dad were very known in the community, right, with the kids and everything they did. My dad was my baseball coach growing up and everything. I came from a strict Catholic family. My 2 older sisters went to Catholic school. I was an altar boy. I was the president of the student council.
But the streets had other plans for young Mel, and as he grew, so did his restlessness. Mel was a handful from the start. His mother often joked that he came out of the womb on 2 wheels, such was his affinity for anything that moved fast. As a kid, he'd fashion makeshift motorcycles out of cardboard boxes and race them down the sidewalk, much to the amusement and occasional annoyance of the neighbors. By his teenage years, Mel's passion for speed and rebellion had fully taken root.
I met the motorcycle dudes when I was young, 15 and 16 years old. In a gym. There was a gym in my neighborhood. I met these biker guys in there. They used to ride their motorcycles to the gym, and they poured concrete. So, they'd come in and train in their jeans and work boots and no shirts and stuff.
Yeah.
And
the roar of engines called to him like a siren song, drowning out the well-meaning advice of teachers and parents alike.
I was raised in that, the white picket fence beaver cleaver house. And as I grew up and stuff and, started, like motorcycles, I had dirt bikes and everything. And they showed me how to train. Like, hey, kid, that ain't right. Do this, do that. And they showed me the old school way of training. Lo and behold, they were members of the Hells Henchmen, which we were before we patched over to Hells Angels in Chicago. And I didn't know that for, maybe, close to, 8 months, a year later.
What was it about those bikes that captivated him? Was it freedom? The danger? Or maybe it was the promise of brotherhood, a family he never knew he needed.
So it's a funny story. I say the same guys that showed me how to train the old school way and, get bodybuilding big, showed me how to live the motorcycle lifestyle, right? The 1%er lifestyle.
High school became a blur of detentions and missed classes, and was later kicked out for beating the head principal. But Mel's mind was already on the open road. He got a job pouring concrete in his uncle's concrete business.
And all of a sudden one day she came home with some work boots, and I go, "What are them?" She goes, "Oh, you're going to work. You're not sitting in the yard in the pool." My uncle owned a concrete company. So that's how I started pouring concrete, and that's what them 3 biker dudes that I had met in this gym were pouring concrete, just a coincidence and stuff.
At 16, Mel bought his first real motorcycle, a beat-up Harley he lovingly restored.
I'm making $1,500 a week, $18 an hour pouring concrete. That's a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
So I buy my first IROC, I buy my first Harley, and then...
The road stretched out before him, full of promise and peril. Where would it lead? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Mel Chancey was born to ride, and ride he would, straight into the annals of outlaw biker history. The wind in his hair, the rumble of the engine beneath him, this was living, this was freedom. And he was just getting started. Climbing the ranks, the Hell's Henchman, Chicago's own outlaw motorcycle club. It was here that Mel found his tribe, but respect had to be earned the hard way.
So they say, the story is the same guys that showed me how to train heavy and crazy were the same guys that showed me how to do the motorcycle lifestyle.
Wow.
That's how I stepped into that world,
He started as a prospect, the lowest of the low, cleaning bikes, running errands, taking shit from everyone. It wasn't glamorous, but Mel didn't complain. He had something to prove, not just to the club, but to himself and the world.
"Well, how old are you now?" I said, "It's only been a year and some change. I'm 19. And they said, "Man, you're going to age rough. You look older. You want to come in the club?" I said, "I do." They said, "Okay, come on, let's make it official. You become an official hang-around at a prospect, and then you get voted for your patch, right?" Yeah, so that's how it happened, and that's what I did. And I was very eager there. When I got into that world, I wanted to learn that world.
But Mel took it all in stride. He worked harder, trained harder, fought harder. His fists did the talking, and people started listening. Rivals learned to fear him, and brothers learned to trust him.
But in that world comes the nonsense, the violence, the tit for tat with the other clubs and stuff like that, as we say, and I was into that part. Them cats showed me the violent side of the lifestyle.
Slowly but surely, Mel climbed the ranks of the Hell's Henchmen. The older members watched, sizing him up. Was this kid for real? Or just another wannabe? Mel's dedication was put to the test time and time again. He ran errands that often skirted the edge of legality.
So I would be out every night as a prospect and doing all this stuff, and then
he stood watch during deals that he knew better than to ask about. And when rival gangs came knocking, Mel was always first in line to defend his brothers.
Learned it fast, and I watched it, and I watched how some of these guys came right in, and when it was time to fight and throw hands, there was no question about it.
Finally, after months of grueling tests and trials, the moment Mel had been waiting for arrived. They called him to the front of the clubhouse, the air thick with anticipation. The president, a grizzled old biker with more scars than teeth, looked Mel up and down. For a moment, the world stood still. Then, with a gruff nod, he handed Mel his colors. Mel Chancey was now a full-patch member of the Hell's Henchmen.
I got my patch right before I was 21.
As he donned the jacket for the first time, feeling the weight of the patches on his back, Mel knew his life had changed forever. But this was just the beginning. The real test lay ahead.
So when I finally was in the club and got my patch and everything like that, it was probably not even 6-8 months later I became our sergeant of arms.
Yeah.
So that's how I started in the rankings.
What challenges awaited? What sacrifices would be required?
I did that for a long time. And then finally, you know, when I got in the club and I started seeing what guys were doing, and I'm like, man, this working for a living is pretty brutal here. I'm trying to work 10-hour days in the hot sun and then hang out all night and go on trips and stuff like that. This is a little crazy. Well, then I learned the cocaine game, right?
Yeah.
Back then in the 80s, it was huge, right? I seen guys that were making, you know, $1,000, $2,000 a week, and I'm like, wow, they're not killing themselves here. So I went in and
The road was long, and it was about to get bumpy. But Mel was ready, or at least he thought he was. Fu Patchover, 1994. A year that would change everything for Mel and his brothers. Whispers in the wind spoke of something big coming down the pipeline. The Hells Angels, the most notorious motorcycle club in the world, wanted in on Chicago turf. It was an offer the Hells henchmen couldn't refuse, but it came at a heavy price. Mel, now the youngest president in the club's history, at just 23.
for the president. So one day I walked into a meeting and I was a few minutes late. And if you're late, you call up, hey man, I got stuck by a trainer. I'm a few minutes late, man. And pardon me, I'm right there. And I walked into the meeting and everybody was in there. They said, hey Rode, listen man, we took a vote and you're not the sergeant of arms anymore. And I said, really? How could you guys take a vote without me being here? How are you bringing this up to me and you're not being here? I said, I'm not the sergeant of arms. I'm like, man, I bleed this chapter. What are you talking about? And that's when Jerry, his name was, he said to me, he goes, hey man, we nominated you to be the president. I was like, what? Like, wow, man, I'm taking. So in 1994, we switched from the Hells Henchmen to we became Hells Angels, right? We were talking to the Hells Angels, and one of the henchmen was in the penitentiary with an angel out of Minnesota, and they had a good relationship with each other. And the Hells Angels at the time were never in the Midwest. It was Minnesota, and then nothing in the Midwest, and then it was Ohio. So there was that big gap of no Hells Angels right there, and we were the opportunity, right? The Hells Henchmen.
War was coming. The Outlaws, Chicago's dominant club, wouldn't stand for it. Not in their backyard.
So once we decided that we were going to become Hells Angels, well, that changed the game in the history of Chicago because the Outlaws, that was their hometown.
In the end, the vote was cast. The Hells Henchmen were no more. Long live the Hells Angels. The patchover ceremony was a solemn affair, tinged with both excitement and apprehension. As they donned the infamous death head patch, Mel couldn't help but wonder, had he just signed their death warrants? Or was this the beginning of something greater? The Chicago chapter of the Hells Angels was born, with Mel at its helm. But the real challenge was just beginning. The Outlaws weren't going to roll over without a fight.
But things got gritty there is when we switched over to become Hells Angels, because the Outlaws, who were the dominant Midwest motorcycle club at the time, who were at war with the Hells Angels from the late 60s, 69, 70, did not like that. And when they found out we were doing that merge, we sat down with them at a table while we were still henchmen, and we told them, yes, we are going Hells Angel and we are doing this move. And we were in a restaurant, about 6 guys, 6 of them, 6 of us. And that's when they got up from the table and said, well, there's no more discussions here, boys. We'll see you when we see you. Yeah. And I knew it was live then because them dudes were serious dudes.
Mel knew he'd have to be smart, tough, and maybe a little bit lucky to navigate the storm that was coming. Mel's leadership was put to the test almost immediately. As he looked around at his brothers, their new patches gleaming in the dim light of the clubhouse, Mel felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. These men were trusting him with their lives, their freedom, their very futures.
And keeping the crew on track and keeping us, making sure we're taking care of business, and that we were very outnumbered in Chicago, from the other side. The Outlaws were very, very dominant there, man. And, at the height of everything, we had 27 guys, and in all the areas around us, the Outlaws put their crews together. I mean, they can put 120 guys together in 30 minutes of phone calls. So we were really, outnumbered. But what kept us strong,
he silently vowed not to let them down. Little did Mel know, the decisions he'd make in the coming months and years would test that vow to its very limits. The Chicago streets were about to become a battleground, and Mel Chancey was standing right in the crosshairs. war on the streets. Tension filled the air, thick enough to choke on. The outlaws weren't happy, not one bit. And Mel knew it was only a matter of time before the powder keg exploded. Every day became a waiting game, a test of nerves. Mel's brothers looked to him for guidance, for strength, but even he had his doubts and fears. Still, he couldn't show weakness. Not now. Mel tightened security, ran drills, and prepared for the worst.
But what kept us strong was the unity we had with each other. We had a young crew, me being the youngest, but I showed you a picture, and we had a very young crew, and most of the guys trained. Back then there was no MMA, so we were just all pounding on the bags. Sure. You had to make sure you were in shape, but you couldn't be so big that you were in a bar and you couldn't fight.
But nothing could have prepared them for what came next. June 13th, 1994, a date that would be etched in blood and fire. The Hells Angels clubhouse, their sanctuary and home, was reduced to rubble in an instant. 100 pounds of C4 explosives had delivered a message written in destruction.
They put 100 pounds of C4 in a car, shaped it and everything like that, drove it up. Our clubhouse was in a crazy, it was called Grand Avenue, and it was a very busy street. And it was about 5 o'clock, in a weekday afternoon. It was a Tuesday, Wednesday or something like that, middle of the week, traffic going by and everything. And they built the bomb in the trunk of this car.
By some miracle, no one was inside when the bomb went off, but the message was crystal clear. This was war. Mel stood in the debris, rage boiling inside him. The next move was his, and it would change everything. Retaliation came swift and merciless. Mel knew the rules, an eye for an eye. But this was beyond that. This was an all-out war.
We were doing that tit-for-tat thing, and like I said, none of us knew that game. So it became it was a personal level, fighting, running in each other's bars, doing stuff like that, to now, wow, this thing just happened and turned the game around with the bombing stuff, right? And that was the first of a few that happened.
He gathered his most trusted lieutenants, planning in secret. No half measures, no mercy, no survivors. The streets of Chicago ran red as chaos reigned supreme. Shootings, bombings, brutal beatings. No one was safe.
We had no clue. We're like, man, these guys are, using bombs, and we got remote starts, and, we don't know how to do that. So we had to figure out a way to do that and to get back. It was a way that we had to get back into that scene. We didn't know. We were still trying to run in the bars and find them as they were finding us and doing the old hand-to-hand stuff, right? So we learned that, right? And then.
The cops were overwhelmed, and the feds took notice. But Mel couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Every attack fueled his rage and determination.
In the 90s, it got crazy with the bombings and the shootings, and it went from what I called it, the playground, fights and throwing tan bark at each other and socking each other here and there, to shooting on motorcycles, and, knowing that we got to keep our guys safe too. I show everybody, I got the tombstones on my arms from the brothers that got killed in that war. And, when you see a brother that you're tight with, and now he's laying in a casket, and I'm watching his 16-year-old daughter, before we close the casket, lay herself over the casket, and she's rubbing her father's hair for the last time. Boy, that hits different.
As the war dragged on, Mel's reputation grew. He was feared on the streets and respected in the underworld. But he was also a prime target for rival gangs and law enforcement alike. The pressure was mounting from all sides. In the midst of the chaos, Mel never lost sight of his ultimate goal: to make the Chicago Hells Angels the most powerful club in the Midwest. But as the body count rose and the feds closed in, he began to wonder if the price of power might be too high.
I remember standing at the casket. A couple of the brothers were with me, and we were getting ready to put his patch over him before we shut the casket, right? And his daughter jumped in there and was doing that, saying goodbye to her dad. And I remember the tears coming from my eyes, thinking, we did this. This was our decisions that made this all happen here. We're all responsible for this, right? And how do you get out of it, though? How do you just say time out into something like that? You know, them cats weren't wanting hair timeout, so you just have to go with the flow, right? And be a part of the environment that got created around you.
Little did Mel know, the biggest battle of his life was yet to come. And it wouldn't be fought on the streets, but in a courtroom. The war had caught the attention of forces far beyond Chicago, and they were about to bring the full weight of the law down on Mel Chancey and his brothers. For fall, blue lights and sirens pierced the night. The law was closing in, and Mel knew it was coming.
But when you have 2 bombings on one day, that's something that they've never seen before. And then after, you know, we did their clubhouse, then that was the full court press. That's when the government came in and said, hey, no more of this. Like the violence on violence, biker violence on biker violence, they don't like, but it's passable. But when you start Beirut in the city, they're going to come with the full court press, right?
But not like this. Feds swarmed everywhere, kicking down doors and making arrests. The magic word was RICO. The club's worst nightmare came to life.
At the time, Janet Reno was the U.S. Attorney General, the United States Attorney General and stuff, and, you know, we all know she was no nonsense. And she put a team, and she said, both sides, get both sides, you know. And that's how the RICO investigation started. So, you know, that kind of put the city on edge and stuff, you know. She put the full court press on. She said, no more. She nicknamed this thing Operation Lucifer, put a full court press on us. They put a full court press on the Outlaws. And in 1997, that was the first RICO indictments. And they hit the Outlaws first because they had them not only on the predicate acts fighting us and the bombing and stuff. That guy that put the bomb there, he flipped later in life, you know, he flipped for the government. So they got that whole scene that went down.
Before the indictment on the Hells Angels, Mel gets a 4-year sentence for beating up a DJ who was abusing his ex-girlfriend.
Back up, I went to prison in 98 for, you know, beating that guy up. Remember DJ's story in the house? Yeah. The guy was beating up an ex-girlfriend of mine, and I kind of took it to a little bit of a level. And I got a 4-year sentence on that one. So now I'm in state prison, 98, right? I'm in state prison, knowing that the RICO is getting put together on us. I'm hearing the buzz from the streets. I've got some people telling me, man, they're putting this RICO case together on you guys.
Mel watched his empire crumble as brother turned on brother.
One of the Hell's henchmen prior to this, he didn't make it to the Angel side, he flipped. And he was a good friend of mine, and I didn't know he flipped. And I was the target. His name was Jim. And they told Jim, we want Mel.
Plea deals and witness protection programs shattered the old code of silence. But Mel wouldn't break. He couldn't. Even as the evidence mounted and the charges piled up, he stood firm, a captain going down with his ship. The trial was a media circus, a public spectacle with Mel at the center of it all. He remained defiant to the end, but the verdict was never really in doubt. Guilty on all counts.
So I pled guilty to the mail fraud and got 18 months. So the day that I was getting released out of the state penitentiary, I went into the Sally Port. They switched my handcuffs. The marshals picked me up, took me to a federal holding facility, and then designated me to a federal prison. So I really did back-to-back sentences, you know.
As they led him away in chains, Mel couldn't help but wonder, was it all worth it? All the blood, all the sacrifice. For what? A patch? A reputation? Or something more, something he couldn't yet see? As Mel's sentence neared its end, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. In late 2000, Mel Chancey walked out of federal prison, a free man once more. But freedom came with strings attached.
Now I come home, it's the end of 2000. Now I come home, I'm on a non-association. I can't talk to the Angels. I can't take their calls. I can't look at them, the whole 9 yards, you know? So at that time, I'm knowing that they're trying to get this RICO of everything we did in the 90s, right? Because now once I'm gone, I'm not part of the enterprise anymore. I'm out on non-association.
The federal authorities were taking no chances. They wanted to ensure Mel's break from his old life was complete and permanent. For a man who had lived and breathed the biker lifestyle for so long, this enforced isolation was both a challenge and an opportunity. Unable to return to his old haunts and associates, Mel found himself at a crossroads. It was then that an unexpected opportunity arose.
I started running some nightclubs for a dear friend of mine that had big, huge nightclubs in Chicago. I started putting all the security together for him. Well, I was so good at doing that in the security and putting all the guys in play that some other clubs grabbed a hold of me, and then it became a great gig for me where I was making great money. And I'm like, God, all I got to do is go down and be in these nightclubs, my presence, and have fun. And I'm making, $2,500, $3,000 a week. I'm like, this is great, and I'm out till 5, 6 in the morning having the time of my life,
It was a far cry from leading one of the most notorious biker gangs in Chicago. But for Mel, it was a chance at a new beginning. The skills he had honed as a leader in his outlaw days were now being put to use in a legitimate business. But even as he embraced this new life, the shadows of his past were never far behind. Redemption Road. The year was 2004, and Mel Chancey had reached a turning point. After 4 years of walking the straight and narrow, juggling nightclub security and family life, he made a decision that would shock many of his former associates. Mel Chancey, once the feared president of the Chicago Hells Angels, officially quit the club.
I called the guys up on the phone. I said, guys, listen, man, I think it's time for me. There's no retiring in the club. You quit the club. I think it's time for me. It's time for me to move on. I said, I'm just not, my head's not in it. And in that stage of the game and in that lifestyle, if your head's not in it, you're going to get yourself hurt.
Or somebody else.
Or somebody else. Yeah.
It was a bold move, one that not everyone understood or accepted. But for Mel, it was the only way forward. However, life had one more curveball to throw at him. Just months after leaving the club, Mel found himself facing a RICO indictment. The past, it seemed, wasn't quite done with him yet.
So I quit the club in April. Well, then as I'm going through life and I'm, changed my life around and stuff like that, and now comes December and my doors get blasted in, right?
But this time, something was different. In the face of this new challenge, Mel found strength not in his fists or his reputation, but in an unexpected source: his faith.
Our RICO started in 2004 with 4 of us, and it ended with 4 of us taking and pleading guilty to our charges, and nobody else ever got indicted. Nobody.
As he fought his legal battles, Mel began to dream of a different kind of future.
So you did 9-3?
No. So we came back in, and for me sitting down with the proffer and kind of letting everybody and letting the government know, a lot of stuff they had in there, Nick, was untrue. They had a lot of stuff that from people that came in before us, members that came in before us and wanted to blow the totality of what we did.
So they were just stacking all that stuff.
Stacking all the stuff.
Yeah.
And I corrected. I got the deal for, the proffer for sitting down and being truthful, just like them guys got the deal for sitting down in their proffer and being truthful. And then they dropped my 111 months to 60 months.
Okay.
Cause kind of similar to them, 8 or 9 more months or 10 more months than them guys got, So that was my deal for the proffer. So I came home in 2008 is when I came home. But
he had always been passionate about fitness, and now he saw a way to turn that passion into a positive force in his life and the lives of others.
This was, I guess, technically my 3rd prison sentence and stuff, but that's where my relationship with the Lord got so strong. Because when I first went in, I was like, okay, God, how come? I cleaned up my life.
Upon resolving his legal issues, Mel threw himself into a new venture, opening his own gym. It wasn't just about building muscles. It was about building a community, about offering others the kind of positive influence he wished he'd had in his youth. The gym became a symbol of Mel's transformation.
And in the industry with him, and then I moved down here and bought the gym. We bought the gym. My wife talked me into buying a gym. We bought the gym. We called it Second Chance after my moniker. That became my moniker.
The same discipline and leadership that had once made him a feared outlaw now made him a respected businessman and mentor. But perhaps the most profound change in Mel's life came through his deepening relationship with his faith. The man who once led brutal gang wars now leads daily devotionals, sharing messages of hope and redemption with thousands of followers around the world. This daily practice of faith and fellowship has attracted followers from all walks of life. including some former outlaws seeking their own path to redemption. For Mel, it's a way to use his past to positively impact the future. Today, Mel Chancey stands as a testament to the power of change. The former Hell's Angel now spends his days running his gym, leading his online devotionals, and speaking to groups about the dangers of the life he once lived. From Hell's Angel to Guardian Angel. Who'd have thought? His journey from the heights of outlaw power to the depths of prison, and finally to a life of service and faith, serves as both a warning and a beacon of hope. It's a story that challenges our assumptions about redemption and the human capacity for change. The journey continues 1 mile at a time, one life at a time, and Mel Chancey rides on into whatever future awaits, guided by a faith that has become his new North Star.